Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to a brand new podcast feed here on the CVCS Podcast Network. This is, I'm excited to say, the first podcast feed that is dedicated to a class project that comes from an elementary classroom. This project and this podcast is called the Grade Mission Memoirs. And this was headed up by Miss Kelsey Hampson, who teaches social studies to all of our fourth graders. And this is a project that we're going to get to introduce this morning, and I'm lucky enough to be joined by Miss Hampson in the studio today to talk about this. So first of all, Miss Hampson, welcome, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited for this. I've heard some of the audio that the audience is going to get to hear from the students, and it's really just tremendous and really fun stuff. So let's just get started. We have these standard questions that I ask every teacher as they start a project and as they come in and introduce it to our audience. So Ms. Hampson, let's start with just you introducing yourself. How did you get involved in education, and how did you end up at CVCS?
Awesome. I'm super excited about this project. Yes, so like Mr. Jasper said, I'm Miss Hampson, and I've been teaching at CVCS this is my fourth year now of fourth grade. So I like to say it's my golden year.
There you go.
Teaching fourth grade. And I got involved in education at a really young age. I just always knew that I wanted to teach. Mm-hmm. And I actually went to college for an English degree. And I was trying to decide if I wanted to teach more like high school English or if I wanted to stick with the littles. Yeah. And then just spending time with field hours in elementary, I fell in love with it. And how I ended up at CVCS is I got hired during all the COVID craziness of 2020. Yes. And so I really didn't even know that CVCS existed. I had only known about public schools in the area my whole life, went to public school. And then a mentor of mine was like, hey, have you checked out Capo Valley Christian School? Because I think they're looking to hire and keep people in person right now.
Oh, snap.
And I was just like loving Jesus, wanting to spread his word, but also teach. I'm like, that sounds great.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I just fell in love with the school when I came for my interview, and they opened with prayer. Miss Day and the head of schools at the time just opened with prayer and showed me a list of attributes of the school just about following Jesus and excellent education. And I was like, wow, I think this is exactly where God wants me. And I've felt the same ever since. So
that's awesome.
That's kind of a little intro of how I'm here.
That's tremendous. Yeah. Can you introduce us to the podcast itself, the project? What were students assigned to do? Like, what did they have to read or prepare or whatever? And how does this fit in the larger context of your class? What are students doing, like, in the class, around this project? And how does it fit into that?
Yeah, great question. So the project itself is the infamous, depending on how you've heard of it, mission project for California history in fourth grade. And so I knew when I was taking on the social studies role for fourth grade that would be a big part of what I got to teach and lead and walk students and parents through. And so in years past, this project has been a requirement for every student to build a 3D model of their mission, which is still,
when I was in fourth grade.
Everyone does.
Sugar cubes.
Yes, we had students use sugar cubes.
Oh,
it's still the thing to do. But I got so much good feedback last year from families and students who were thinking of other creative outlets for their mission research.
Sure.
And I really wanted to explore that. So I did with Miss Day before this school year. And we kind of came up with the idea to do more like a choice board where every student got the same assignment of we researched together all 21 of the California missions in class. And then they chose their top 3. Submitted that to me. I assigned a different mission to each student.
Awesome.
Almost everybody got one of their top 3. It's always a crazy toss-up.
Sure.
But
what is like the least wanted mission of all 21?
Oh my gosh. The least
Putting you on the
wanted,
spot. But
I feel like it's just the ones that you don't always hear about, like San Francisco Solano.
Sure.
Or things like that, like so far north from us.
Yeah.
They're like, what? that place exists.
Is the one that's down the street from the school like the most popular one?
Yes.
Okay.
By far, San Juan Capistrano is the most popular. And then alongside that, any like SoCal beach missions.
Sure.
You've got like San Luis Rey de Francia. You've got San Diego de Alcala. Like we're such OC people.
Absolutely.
They're like, where's the mission that is right on the beach?
Yeah, exactly. Sorry to interrupt. But
No, you're good.
But
You're
yeah.
good. So yeah, back to kind of like what they had to do for the project. We chose websites that would help the kids with their research, like California Missions Foundation type websites. So the kids were practicing finding research, pulling information from those safe educational websites, and putting it together in a couple different outlets. So one thing they could do, like I said, was build the 3D mission model.
Yeah.
They could have created a Google slideshow, and so some students chose to do that and just add pictures and things like that. Some students chose to do a poster board and have more of that, again, 3D, but more of like the display of all of their research. And then some students were really excited to hear about this new opportunity to record with their voice in a podcast studio. I remember I was so excited to do that in 4th grade. And so it was fun to give them another option. And so, yeah, every student took their research and just shared it in different outlets, if that makes sense.
What percentage of students, how many students did a podcast this first of all? How many episodes are we going to hear?
We're going to hear 7 episodes.
7?
Yes.
Out of how many 4th graders?
Out of 41
Okay.
4th graders.
That's awesome.
Yes.
My next question is just what was your reasoning for deciding to allow a podcast as opposed to another, or I guess in this case, as opposed to some other kind of format doesn't work? You gave them a bunch of options. What made you feel like a podcast was a good option for them?
Totally. That's such a good question. And I heard that there was a podcast studio, and I heard that it was more of a high school, junior high embedded format from just the start of this year, but that it was also open, like when you came and talked to all the elementary teachers and said like, hey guys, this is an opportunity. If you want, let me know. And that just kind of stuck with me. And so then when this project was coming back around, like it does each year, I was like, what a great opportunity for kids to share their learning and practice other standards like public speaking and enunciating and volume, like projecting. And it also isn't about, you know, some kids get nervous like being seen, like all eyes on them. So I think it's a great outlet for kids who get a little bit nervous having a bunch of eyes on them, because like we just got to sit in a very intimate setting, just me and them.
That's right.
And they're looking at me like my teacher already knows everything I'm about to say. That's a very comfortable place to be.
Absolutely.
So I think it was really cool. Yeah. And I noticed the kids who picked podcasts too, it was a good mix of those who kind of have those like radio announcer voices already at 9 years old. And then also the ones who I could tell felt more at ease in this room.
Absolutely.
So it was a cool combo.
It was cool seeing you come in with the students and just briefly introducing myself and introducing them to the studio, and seeing them, they first reaction is they look around and they're like, whoa, this room looks so cool and different. And
they're like in awe.
They are. They're touching the walls. We have foam padding on the walls to deaden the sound, and they're just like, ooh. But then seeing them sit in front of the microphone and pull it kind of in front of their face, and I forget the first one.
Tommy.
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Tommy Deering.
Holy cow. He just lit up, and he was so in the zone. He was just in the pocket the whole time. And
yes, he could be a radio announcer.
Exactly. Like today.
Yeah. Exactly.
He was just like owning it and having, I think, the time of his life. It's funny. The next question is, what were your expectations as you decided to like allow for a podcast? I think from hearing your story, you know, most teachers, when I ask them that as they're doing a podcast, they go, oh, like we didn't know much about it. We wanted to try it and stuff like that. And there's probably an element of that in you too. But you having done podcasts before in your education, I think you actually probably came in with different or maybe broadened expectations. Can you talk about what did you expect of your students, and what did you anticipate perhaps struggles or, you know, things that would be easy for them going into the project?
Yeah, totally. I think I did have an interesting perspective because I was a fourth grader who recorded podcasts of my own when I was in elementary school. And I just remember being pulled by the parent volunteer, sitting in the pod and recording my podcast on Sir Francis Drake, the explorer.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Like I remember to this day all about Sir Francis Drake and how I just wanted to open in a really interesting way and how I wanted to make sure I said all of my facts and I was very clear. I didn't speak too fast or too slow. So I feel like all of those things that I thought of myself when I was 9 years old, I was like, okay, as the teacher sitting here, I'm like, okay, this student in front of me is probably thinking, am I talking too fast? Am I talking too slow? Can they understand me? Like all the things that I thought of.
Absolutely.
And so I really did think about that going into it. But then I also thought of something cool about the podcast is, which I told the students, because it can be super nerve-wracking when you're just like, you have a mic in front of you, and if you've never had a mic in front of you and you're watching the thing tick as you're talking and you're like, am I even doing this right? Yeah. So I always tell them, I'm like, we'll listen to it at the end and we can always fix whatever you want to.
Yeah.
And I think I already knew that I wanted to do that going into it, which takes more time. Definitely takes more time, but I think it's so worth it because then you know that the student's so proud of the end result and they feel like it's their best quality work. So I remember thinking that when I was in elementary school, and I really wanted to bring that into this too.
The thing about the listening back to what you had just recorded with the students with them was that it's not a thing that people have typically come in through here and done. People typically, first of all, by the way, if it's high school students, their teacher doesn't come along with them.
Oh, right. They can be independent, I guess.
Yeah. And, they'll typically lay down their recording and then they'll knock on my door and say, okay, we did it. We're done. Like, see ya. And they don't hear it until it's actually published. After, of course, it's been edited and everything too. But I think that's such a fun, like, little element of this, especially as you're speaking about, like, the confidence in themselves, and if they're super nervous coming in here, they don't know what the end result is really going to sound like, and maybe they think that they're going to sound bad or slow or dumb or something, and for you to be able to say, okay, now let's just listen back to this and inspire confidence and give them like affirmation, this is great, I think is like definitely a really big piece for this, which is awesome. And then there's another follow-up question to that. Do your old recordings of your Sir Francis Drake podcast exist somewhere? Like, do you just have those? Are those on Spotify?
They've got to be on a CD because, it was a CD time of my life.
That's right.
They've got to be. I'm sure my mom has the CD.
Oh,
I could probably call her up right now and she would like bring you.
Let's get her on the line.
She would bring you the CD.
No, that's awesome. As you talk to students and after a student has recorded, did you get any opportunity to debrief the recording session with your students? And if so, what were their thoughts? What was their favorite part? What do they feel good or bad about having recorded the podcast?
Yes, we actually did a couple different ways. I think naturally the walk back from the podcast studio to the classroom, I can always get a read on them if they're like, oh my gosh, like they're like breathing a sigh of relief, or if they're like, that was actually like easier than I thought. Like I could kind of sense that from them. So we just like informally debriefed on the walk back, and a lot of them were like, I would want to do that again. That was so cool. That was like better than I thought it was going to be, which is just so awesome.
That's amazing.
Kudos to you guys for opening a studio that like gives them that confidence. And then we also did a formal reflection where I had every student, no matter what choice board type of project they picked, they split their paper in half. They wrote on one side what was the hardest part of the project for them, and they wrote on the other side what was their favorite part, the best part, the part they were most excited for. And a lot of the podcast kids wrote that the best part was the actual seeing the studio, recording, and hearing themselves back.
Incredible.
So that was really exciting.
That's
and
awesome.
Also good confirmation, like, okay, I should keep the podcast as a part of this project moving forward and maybe think of other ways to incorporate it into fourth grade. So
that's incredible. It makes me so happy hearing that. That's just so fun. On a professional level, as a teacher, what have you learned about your practice, your teaching through this project? Even if it's not the podcasty part, that it could just be about the missions project. But if there is anything about the podcasts, yeah, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, with teaching, you learn more every single year. So especially when you do like the same big project every year, it's like, parents, kids, like you remember your mission project. It's like something that people remember forever. And so I was so nervous my first year because I was like, they're going to remember this forever and I'm leading it. And what am I doing?
No pressure.
And so there was an element of that adding the podcast studio because I'm like, I really don't know how this is going to go, and these kids are putting their trust in the podcast style, in me to sit with them and help them through it.
Right.
And I just really wanted to go well. And I feel like I've learned that trying new outlets and trying new things with students is so fun.
Yes.
As long as I keep my expectations in check. If I'm like, this is going to be perfect, like everyone's going to be one take and, then that's not going to go very well. But if like the focus is a team sport, like the student and the teacher coming together, trying something new, being willing to make mistakes, fix them, talk about it. It's been so cool. And I just want to do more of it.
Oh, that's so cool. Hearing you say that leads into my next question, which is, if you're going to do a podcast again, which it sounds like you are, which is awesome. What about the process, maybe the setup or the directions that you give students? How will you present the project differently maybe in the future? Or how will you just straight up facilitate the project differently in the future based on the past couple of weeks and this experience?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that next time I would have more outlines for what the podcast questions and answers should look or feel like.
Sure.
I helped some students leading up to actually coming and recording edit their questions and answers to add a little bit or take away some of the comments that would only make sense if you could see them.
Oh,
if that makes sense. Some people were saying, like one of my sweet students wanted to say like, welcome, Miss Hampson, but I'm the one who starts the podcast interview. So it's like, we're going to take that out. So things like that.
That's
now
really
I know
cute.
for
That's
next
so
time.
Funny.
Oh, they're adorable.
Yeah.
They're so cute. So now I know for next time, like to let them know, hey, I will be the one starting this interview and I'll give you times to share whatever you want, but just so you know.
Yeah.
And then I think another thing is just the logistics of recording.
Sure.
Because, I got to make sure my class is covered while I'm with one student in the podcast studio. And I'm like, is PE over? Like right now, I'm like, they're coming back from library in 3 minutes.
Oh, gosh.
So it's like planning that. I think next time I might take like a whole day and just take every single podcast student back to back. So I'm just set up in the podcast studio.
That's right.
And they're coming to me. Like my aide could send them down to me.
Yes.
So I think just logistically, like as the teacher, I think I would do that next time.
That's a really good consideration in retrospect. That's awesome. Our last two questions kind of turn the focus to our audience. First of all, what could our audience members expect to hear now that they're going to start listening to the student episodes? For example, did you have any kind of format or anything like that? It sounds like it was mostly just kind of an interview.
Yes.
Tell me about the format of the episodes and, again, what our audience is going to hear when they hit play.
Yeah. So basically what the audience can expect to hear is every single question and answer was written by the students. So I didn't write the questions, the students did.
Incredible.
And I think what's really cool about that is they have complete ownership. I did not write any of it. And so if they're choosing to have me ask them a question, it's because they found that interesting about their mission. So I was just reading the questions that the students wrote, and obviously I helped them like make sure it made sense, but I didn't tell them, oh, hey, you should ask about the bell tower.
Right,
You know, like they picked, we call them artifacts.
So awesome.
But they picked these artifacts that stuck out to them from their research, whether they went in person to their mission or they researched online. And then you can just see how much they care about their research because they're so excited to share it. And so that was really cool.
That's amazing. Last question for us before we sign off is just to ask you to speak directly to our audience, not even to me, but can you give a send-off to our audience now that they're going to start hearing student episodes? What do you hope the audience gets out of hearing these podcasts?
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for clicking on the fourth grade mission memoirs and listening to the students. I'm hopeful that you just learn, as well as learning about the California missions and maybe being recalled back to when you were in fourth grade in California, because it sounds like you already were,
I did,
Mr. Jasper. I hope it just has that nostalgic feel of returning to your fourth grade years in California education. But also I hope that you hear the excitement in the students' voices to share their research, that maybe sometimes it might be a little hard to understand them or they speak a little quicker and then a little slower, but this is their first time doing something like this. And I just remember loving it when I was in fourth grade, and I wanted these students to just be exposed to as many different outlets for their education that they can be, because you don't know what you enjoy until you try it.
That's right.
And I would never have been like, oh, I love recording podcasts until my teacher was like, hey, Kelsey, do you want to record a podcast for Sir Francis Drake? So yeah, I think you're going to really enjoy listening to, their personalities just come out like nobody's business, and it's so fun. They sound like little radio announcers.
Yeah.
So I hope you enjoy listening and just take away that fourth grade mission memoirs is a great avenue for these kids to use for their research.
I love it. That's a fantastic place to leave off. Ms. Hampson, thanks again for joining me in the studio today. Thanks for leading this project with so much care and humor and joy. And again, to reiterate that, we can't wait for you to hear these. This is the first podcast. These are the first episodes coming out of this studio that are exclusively from elementary students. That's a big badge of honor for us.
We are honored to be a part of it. And thanks, Mr. Jasper, for all you've done to set up this studio and just communicate really easily with me as I was helping the students. And teaching's a team sport. I say it all the time.
It totally is. It totally is. Well, thank you so much again. And audience, thank you for listening. We're excited as you embark on these mission memoirs with our fourth graders, starting later in this same feed. So stay tuned, and also check out the other things we have going on the CVCS Podcast Network. Thank you so much, and have a great day. This episode has been a production of the Capistrano Valley Christian Schools Podcast Network. Capistrano Valley Christian Schools is a Christian JK through 12 school in San Juan Capistrano, California. Be sure to check out, subscribe to, and leave a review of this show and the other shows on our network on your podcast player of choice. Doing so supports the school community in a multitude of ways. For more information about the CVCS Podcast Network or any of our other shows, check out cvcs.org or email podcasts@cvcs.org. On behalf of the whole network, this is Mr. Jasper saying thank you again for listening, and stay tuned for more.